being in the minority it takes skill to serve and to be effective as a member in the minority.
Welcome to 701 Civics. On this episode, I chat with Representative Corey Mock, a Democrat who served in the House of Representatives from 2009, and as of this interview, is wrapping up his time in the House of Representatives, having decided to not run for re-election in 2024. In fact, Mr. Mock will be taking up the position of Chief Information Officer in the administration of the newly elected Governor of North Dakota, Republican Kelly Armstrong. This episode dives into the role of a minority party, in this case the Democrats, in a state like North Dakota, in which the party in power, the Republicans, have a supermajority. We look at the ability of minor parties to impact legislation and how they work to get their issues heard. Toward the end of the podcast, Representative Mock and I discuss the potential impact of the term limits initiative that was passed by North Dakota voters in 2022. So sit back and enjoy this interview with Representative Corey Mock. For today's podcast, I'm really excited to welcome Corey Mock, the legislative representative for District 18 out of Grand Forks, and I enjoyed our email correspondence back and forth. On sort of palliative care, I guess is how you sort of referred to it a little bit, being an outgoing legislator, and one of the rare ones you kind of have decided to retire at a relatively young age at this point anyway. I won't ask you about any future plans. But if you could give listeners just a little bit of a bio about yourself and, again, how you sort of balance the legislative life with a personal life, being the legislature set up like it is, being the every other year. Right. So I'll just turn it over to you.
I appreciate it. Well, thanks for inviting me on the podcast, Brian. This is great. As you said, my name is Corey Mock. I'm a legislator, serving the House of Representatives, District 18, which is Grand Forks, downtown area, Grand Forks largely. And I've been in the legislature, so as you mentioned, be coming up on a even 16 years in just a few days from the time we're recording. And I did not run for re-election, so as we were emailing back and forth, I've been jokingly calling it that I'm in political hospice. Mm-hmm. So it's I think 17 more days again from this moment before I cross over. I walk into the to the metaphorical light,
okay,
of political afterlife. So it's been an incredible opportunity. I first ran. You mentioned retiring at a relatively young age. I'm 39. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm still eligible for 40 under 40 awards.
There you go.
And I'm retiring. It's a little bizarre, especially in an institution that, I don't know what it is today, but the median age of legislators has got to be dinner at 4:30 p.m. age. I mean, sure. It's eligible for senior citizen discounts. It's not a profession that's known for young professionals or mid-career professionals. Historically, it's usually older than average. So it doesn't represent your general population, demographically speaking. Mm-hmm. So that was one of the reasons I ran. You mentioned, why did I get into this? I was a college student at the University of North Dakota. I was graduating. The district itself, it was the smallest geographical district in the state, roughly the size. I again jokingly say about the Mall of America. An IKEA footprint is about the size of it, about 2.5 square miles, and. The executive director of the Democratic Party in 2008, who's a good friend of mine, reached out and said, hey, we're looking for candidates, people who are familiar with the campus, but also familiar with the off-campus community, and you check several boxes. All the boxes, I don't know what, sweetheart thing he said to me to get me to say yes, but of course, I had to ask how many people have said no before you got to me, all of the self-deprecating things you say in that situation.
Sure.
I never thought he was serious about me running. I was 22 at the time, about to turn 23. I thought he meant work on a campaign. So it ended up being, no, we want you to run. We've got there's an amazing future attorney, former UND football star, captain of the football team at UND, Max Schneider. He's going to be running for the state senate. I think you guys would complement each other well. I really think you should run. And talked with friends, family. Family was supportive. Friends said, "You mean you'll be gone for 4 months every other year?" Yes. How do we sign up? We'll knock doors. And ended up getting elected. And the fascinating thing about that district and in that election year is it ended up being a Democratic senator, a Democratic House member, and a Republican House member. And the Republican was Representative Stacey Dahl, another young professional, young elected. All three of us that year were under the age of 30. So the entire district was represented by people that had not yet hit 30. There was John Seelock, a journalist out of New Jersey, was writing a book about young electeds and millennials getting involved in public office, wrote about our district. And this, we were a focus in one of his chapters in the book. And it was not just us, but it was that district historically. It has been a young district. Young Wayne Stenjum, young Jim Poolman. It really has been a launching pad for a lot of young, politically focused, civically minded professionals at getting their start in politics. So I represented that district for 8 years, and then this district, current district, just down the road for the last 8. So I know that I've rambled on that a lot. We certainly can talk a little bit more about other things, but there's kind of how we got to now.
Yeah. And so, again, you are retiring, even though I said I wouldn't bring it up too much. Do you find that being the part-time legislator and having to have the career on the side is just a little bit much of a balancing act right now?
There are times where it's seemingly impossible. There is a reason you don't have a lot of younger professionals or mid-career professionals serving, because the sacrifice when you are in the legislature, it's all in. There's no half measures. You're not clocking out at noon and then going to your job. When you're in, you're in, and that's by design. And then North Dakota being a unique state, we're a biennial legislature, so we serve 4 months every 2 years. When we're out of session, that's when most people close the laptop. They don't respond to email very quickly. And then if they're working, they go back to work. Some people still manage to do a little bit of work during the session, but those are few and far between. From an employer's perspective, it's very difficult to have a salaried or an employee, and for them to say, hey, I want to go get involved in politics, put my name on the ballot, put a political affiliation next to my name, which is now going to stick to you because you have a Republican or a Democrat that works for you. That alone can be daunting. And by the way, I want you to let me go to Bismarck and serve for 4 months every 2 years. And so it becomes difficult for a lot of your just working professionals. It's why you have a lot of farmers, a lot of retirees, a lot of business owners. So real estate is a popular profession, or has been. In the past, we've had more teachers, we've had lawyers, but most people who are either in a government-related, again, like education type job where they can take a leave of absence, self-employed, and then retirees. So you don't see many in the 30s, 40s, 50s. It's I'd say the 40s and 50s. That age group is probably the least represented. I'll probably get checked on that and not be entirely accurate, but it's close.
Right.
The other part is families. I can't speak for her, but my former colleague, Representative Stacey Dahl, I know that she did not have children when she was in the legislature during those 8 years. She now has a family, her and her husband, they've got kids. I can only imagine the stress that that went into that, knowing we want to have a family, we've got our careers. What does the legislature do that impacts that? How does that help or hinder us? I've gone from being the youngest elected at the time to now a 39-year-old with 3 kids of my own, and I know it would not be possible without fairly supportive employers, but also family. And that is it's absolutely essential.
Right.
There's someone behind the scenes of most government officials, legislators, that is making that possible.
Sure. Well, you've said the one thing about putting that letter behind your name, and of course today people might consider you a little bit of a unicorn in the North Dakota legislature, and it has certainly changed from when you started to now. You're a Democrat.
Yep.
At the time, there was quite a bit more Democratic representation, and that's switched, obviously. What are some of the biggest challenges that you've faced or now have faced in the past as a member of the minority party and shrinking as it did?
Yeah, it's as you mentioned. So I've been in 2008, and the quick historical context. North Dakota, we have 94 House members, 47 senators. When I came in, it's hard to believe 16 years ago that North Dakota was 3 seats away from having a Democratic majority in the Senate. It's amazing. It was 26-21 Republicans and Democrats in the Senate, and it was that way in 2006 as well. On the House side, it doesn't. The number was 58-36. Doesn't seem quite as close. You had a fairly progressive governor with a strong economy. It was Governor Hoeven, a very moderate Republican. Strong economy, oil boom is starting to take off. We're starting to have budget surpluses. Democrats in North Dakota were sizable minority. It takes 12 moderate Republicans, and the 36 Democrats can run the show. And that was frequent.
Sure.
I was on the education committee. It was an 8-6 balance on the committee, and I remember several times where our committee chair held a meeting because she needed all 6 of the Democrats to be there in order for us to move a bill forward that was part of the governor's education bill. They didn't have all the support of the more conservative members of her caucus. So that was that, and it was amazing. We were involved in the policies. Now the downside is the Republican majority saw the Democratic minority as a threat. They were still living in an era when theoretically Democrats could win in almost any district. So you don't want to give your opposition too many victories. So while you may need them at times, there's also an adversarial relationship. The Republican majority would see us as a Democratic caucus as a potential threat, and that there was. It's a unique dynamic. Being in the minority it takes skill to serve and to be effective as a member in the minority. And I think it's even more challenging when it's a narrow minority because you're always afraid of what the balance of power is going to be in the next election cycle. Over the last 16 years, as you pointed out, it has shifted. It's 12% of the legislature is made up of Democratic members, and that is even the lowest vote getter in a statewide race. A Democrat has done better than 12%. I think the lowest is in the high 20s, maybe 30% or so. So it doesn't quite make up the whole political spectrum in North Dakota. More of a conservative body than I think the rest of the state is. And now if you were to be honest, the majority-minority division isn't R and D, it's R and R. It's Republicans and Republicans. It's you choose which is the majority, but you've got your institutional moderate Republicans, your traditional Republicans, and you've got more of a conservative Republican. And those two ideologies are often at conflict. There was a time for about 20 years in North Dakota's history when everything was Republicans. It was Republicans and Republican NPL, and there was less than a handful of Democrats elected to the legislature. The majority and minority would bounce back and forth between R and R, but it was just, are you a capitalist Republican or a nonpartisan league progressive Republican? It was split evenly, even though the balance of power on paper looked like it was 102 to 10.
Sure.
So that coalition government back then, I think we're closer to that now than we are to the conventional style of an R versus D ideological balance. So
sure.
It'll be interesting to see how things shift in the next several years.
Sure. So how do you make sure, coming from the district that you do, how do you make sure your voice or your constituents' voices are heard? How do Democrats in the House and Senate try to say, well, there is another viewpoint? How do you get that across?
Well, everything in politics revolves around trust. And if you want to be effective, if you want to be heard, you need to have trust. Now, North Dakota is, I think we do it exceptionally well, where every bill that's introduced is guaranteed a hearing in committee and a vote on the floor. I don't know of another state that has that I would say progressive of a policy, but I mean, it is a true citizen legislature where a member of the public can ask their legislator to introduce a bill. And you know that in North Dakota, you don't have a powerful committee chair who's just going to shove the bill in their desk drawer and it never sees the light of day again. You get to flush out the ideas and have vigorous debate. So you use that, you work together. One of my philosophies is, especially as a Democrat, in the last session we had 12 in our caucus. Well, if I want my bill to pass in the House, I need more than my 11 fellow Democrats in order to get it across. You need 48. I need 36 more people to vote with me. So anytime I can, I'm going to be working and building relationships with my colleagues. We're coworkers. I've had the good fortune of the 16 years, 12 of my years, I've served in a split district. So there's always been a Republican and a Democrat elected. So I've had that chance to work and serve, and we kind of come into the session with a shared mission. We're going to have maybe a different ideology, maybe different priorities, but we've always been cordial, supportive, and putting our districts first. And I think there's a lot to be learned by having those bipartisan relationships and coming to the Capitol with a district constituent focused mindset. Doesn't happen as much as it used to, and that's truly unfortunate. I hope for the strength of the state and everybody else, I would wish every one of my colleagues the opportunity to serve in a split district and to serve in the minority, even for a day. I think it really changes your perspective, and I think it makes us better legislators.
Sure. So how do you build those relationships to get a bill passed? So if you've got something that you really want to see out there, how do you get that number?
Yeah. I'm one of the things that I've done frequently is I reach out early and often to all of my colleagues, every one of them, congratulate them on their election, send them a handwritten note welcoming them, giving them a phone call. My colleague, you could say he was my opponent, Steve Vetter, Republican representative from District 18. As soon as the election was over, I called and congratulated him. We both won. And it was the first time that happened, he was a little taken aback. I don't think he expected to hear from what he originally is. He's campaigning. He perceives me as the enemy. And,
sure.
And I would say, Steve, we're co-workers now. I mean, that's the spring training's over. We white and green jerseys. Now we're on the same team. Now we get to go and serve work on the field together. We've got the same mission in mind. It's trust takes time to establish. You can lose it in an instant. it's taken me 16 years. I feel like I've had an amazing relationship with virtually every one of my colleagues for at least the last half, if not more. And where it gets lost in politics is when you lose the humanizing elements, where you start demonizing the other person. You have a disagreement in policy, but you criticize the person, or you belittle them, and that's where things fall apart. You lose the connection. This is a tangent, and I'm not sure how to replicate this. Call it a hot take or an unpopular opinion. I think one of the detriments that we had for those relationships in the legislature is when we lost the smoking lounge, which is weird. I've worked on, I've never been a fan of smoking. My family smokes. I'm supportive of the cigarette ban in North Dakota. I remember when they well after the ban took effect that we got rid of the smoking lounge in the Capitol. So it seems weird to say that, but understanding what happened you had non-smokers and smokers alike. It was everyone would come together and politics was left at the door. And that's where legislators got a chance to visit, socialize. How are the kids? How are the grandkids? This is Josh's senior year, isn't it? Yeah, that's the relationship you had. So you come into a social setting where no one has an agenda. You're there as equals. It's a 10, 15-minute break, and then you're back to work. We've lost that. And I don't blame it on smoking or not smoking, but I mean, that was, I think, as I look at that was an element of the process that we've lost. And you could say something similar in DC, where you've turned campaigning into a full-time occupation, where you don't have members traveling and staying together. They're in DC for 3 days, and then they take off, fly home, and raise money. That makes it difficult to develop the rapport, to have that trust, and to functionally work together.
Yeah. So what is the role of the minority party? I mean, we know in a broad sense, we look at Washington, D.C., but in North Dakota now, what is the role of the Democrats versus the majority of Republicans?
Yeah, I would say part of it has not changed. Part of it is representing and vocalizing the views of a different ideology. You could look at any hot topic issue. We've just come off of an election. You hear a lot on abortion. Same-sex marriage is something that's been debated. It gets to the controversial stuff pretty quickly. You can look at those and say, clear line for or against. That's one way of just bringing that other voice to the table. But there's also, so holding the majority accountable. I'd say is the role of the minority, theoretically and practically. Is you hold the majority accountable, and in our system of government, you want to have the member of the minority there checking you. One thing that I've discovered early on is by inviting, when the majority invites the minority to co-sponsor a big bill or to be a part of an initiative that's going to get some headlines, it might be a little risky. You take the small risk of sharing the victory with your theoretical opponent, but you also, it serves as an insurance policy in case it fails. You don't have the "I told you so" moment because you were both there together. You both supported the same thing. You had bipartisan support, so you don't run the risk of success having 1,000 parents and failure being an orphan. You can say that we were part of this together, so we're all in the same boat. Today, with the sizable difference, we're there. I see my role as being a part of a governing coalition. I walk through the door. To me, there's no R or D next to anybody's name. I'm here as a representative of District 18. And I have and will work with any one of my colleagues because that is the democratic process. And on one issue, we might not see eye to eye, but on 30 others, we might be on the same page. And I need to be a part of that. Offer the alternative perspective, use some wisdom, bring that to the table, caution where I see it, call out the bad stuff when you think it exists, offer alternatives. And that should be a healthy, balanced government. The majority has, it's the rule of the majority. Majority prevails. But the minority is there to serve as a counterbalance for accountability and for diversity and vetting of ideas.
Sure. And as you mentioned, every bill gets a vote, goes to the committee. But do you think that there are challenges or obstacles when you are trying to bring some of those minority party perspectives to the floor?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, there can be challenges. Part of it is going to be who's bringing it. Not everybody has that same voice. Your experience, your background. Are you someone? Are you getting up on everything? Are you? Is it always a 5-alarm fire? Is this the biggest, the worst, the best, the whatever? I mean, every superlative that you can think of, is that always your case, or are you the reserved member who can bring something in when necessary? You don't jump up and speak on everything. You speak when it's necessary, and it can be very difficult. You know the votes. It's going to be 82-12 on a partisan vote. There's there's nothing. I'm considered by many the parliamentarian of the House. There is nothing in the procedure book, in Mason's Manual of Legislative Procedure, in our rules that's going to let 12 overrule 82.
Right.
So it does. There are those limitations, but you always have the ability to seek attention and recognition on the floor, to participate in debate. That is a guarantee of our institution. That's embedded in our founding principles. It's embedded in common law and parliamentary procedure that we adopt, and that is probably the tissue that holds it all together. Is allowing the voices to come forward, even when it's not going to be the majority viewpoint.
Right. And so during the legislative session, I think most people have this view that everybody's in the chamber all the time, and that obviously is maybe an hour a day for the actual argument and voting on things. Committees, of course, play a much bigger role.
Right.
How does that look for the minority party? How are those selected when you are in the minority, and what voice is there on those?
Yeah, and this is going to vary by state and even in Congress. I know in Congress, the minority gets to make their own committee assignments. In some states, that's also the case. North Dakota, it's more of a negotiation. There is a committee on committees. Leave it to government to have something as exciting as a committee on committees that is roughly reflective of the balance in majority-minority. So effectively speaking, the majority leader and their appointees are going to have the final say.
Sure.
As a minority member, if I want to have members on the various committees, if I'm trying to get a teacher to be on the education committee, if I want someone with experience to be on appropriations, I'm going to have to work this out with those committee members and leadership. Generally, that goes without many complications. Every once in a while, there's wrinkles that need to be ironed out. You don't always get your way. Legislators at the beginning, so in the next couple of weeks, early December, legislators, before early December, every incoming legislator will receive a preference form, and they will indicate their preferences, and then leadership will go and try to have a relative balance, geographically speaking. You're going to have a proportional representation. Now, with the numbers and the balance getting to the as lopsided as they are with a supermajority, superminority, is how do you have a minority voice on a committee when you don't have enough members of your caucus to serve on every committee. And in the Senate, that's a very real issue. Mm-hmm. Right now, they're coming in. There's going to be 5 Democrats in the state Senate. There are 11 committees, 10 of them policy, and then it's 5A committees, 5B. If you listen to my good friend Senator Sean Cleary's podcast, mm-hmm. he lays it out incredibly as far as the committee assignments. So I won't re-explain. Go back and listen to his. He'll educate you very well if you're not familiar with it. He did a phenomenal job. But you've got 6 essentially committees. Mm-hmm. You've got 4 or 5 Democrats that need. So you're going to have a committee where there's not going to be a D sitting at the table. Mm-hmm. From my perspective, I wish this were the case in the Senate. What I would be advocating for is I want the minority leader to have the right and privilege to serve as an ex officio or maybe even as a voting member of any committee. So that way you ensure there are no shenanigans. You're not steering big, heavy bills to committees without Democratic representation. That way you can't be accused of cutting out that voice. That's not the case, although the Rules Committee will be working here in early December. The House is going to have some similar challenges. Hopefully there's some recognition that it's, to have that flexibility to give your floor leader, the minority leader, and the majority leader, some of those privileges is helpful. It prevents the headaches of leaving important voices out or doing something behind closed doors. Nobody wants that, and even it's all about perception and public trust, and making sure that you have both sides or all sides as much as you can. There is an insurance against the belief or the perception that you're putting your thumbs on the scales and trying to leave anybody out.
So what advice do you give someone who's coming in, maybe they want a Democratic seat, what advice do you give them coming into the new session?
Yeah, well, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, you're coming into the session, my advice is you're coming to a workplace. These are your coworkers. Get to know them. The session moves very quickly. You've got 6 weeks from middle of November to the beginning of the year. This is a great opportunity to introduce yourself and find those unique connections. Why the opening question? Why are you here? Why do you serve? What is it that brought you to this seat? Is it a personal issue? Do you feel a calling? Is it a passion? What is it? And learn those motivations behind your service. Mm-hmm. I think it helps you as a policymaker see where that person is coming from. You may not agree, mm-hmm. but you recognize why they believe that way, especially if it's a strongly held belief, and it makes reconciling those differences a lot easier. You see the human behind the argument, behind the seat. You recognize that we're living in a pretty difficult time politically. There's a lot of tension. We don't need to add negativity. There's plenty of it out there.
Sure.
One thing that we tried right before COVID, proud of this, we had a bipartisan game night. And we did it with the help of the American Toy Association. I happened to have been friends with the director at the time, and she had mentioned that she's offered any legislature, if they want to have a game night, she'll make it happen. And I looked at her, I said, done, let's do it. And I said, I can't believe no one's taken you up on this. This sounds amazing. Well, we put some planning into it, and unfortunately it didn't happen until April, so it was near the end of the session. But we had legislators and staff, about 150 people show up. It was at a hotel, one of our hotels where a lot of legislators stayed at. We just took one of the conference rooms. We set board games up. It was Happy Fish. It was hilarious. If this is a promotion of a specific game, but there was a game none of us had heard of called Happy Fish. Mm-hmm. And you've got legislators that are screaming salmon or dead. I don't know. It's been a couple of years. Mm-hmm. That was such a fun, unique bonding opportunity. And I used it as a chance to give people who may not serve on the same committees, may not sit near each other in the chamber, how can you have an interaction with someone that's a relative stranger to you? And then how does that change your perception of who they are, why they're here, where they're coming from? And it was no scientific studies, but it was very, very well received. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, this was in 2019, right, and we weren't able to replicate it in 21. We kind of lost some momentum. I'm proud to say that now I'm working with the Institute of Civility. So we're doing civility training with legislatures. I'm beginning as a volunteer in that capacity. And I know that many states have implemented civility training as part of their orientation process and bringing everybody together, learning how to debate cordially, to disagree respectfully. There's an opportunity there. North Dakota hasn't done anything formally with it. I imagine that it won't be many years before we're wanting to address some of that and put that into our training.
Sure. Last couple of questions. What advice or suggestions do you give someone interested in pursuing politics as a Democrat in North Dakota? Because admittedly, it's going to look pretty bleak right now. So how do you get someone to run for an open seat?
Yeah, well, not every level of service is partisan. Mm-hmm. That's, in fact, this isn't on a partisan side, but my kids, when I explained to them that I wasn't running for re-election, they were sad. My oldest two are boys. Now they're second in kindergarten, but so this was early this spring, and they were sad. My oldest especially, he was tearful. So even though Dad's gone as much as he is, he really liked living vicariously through the session. He liked coming to, they would call it my Dad's Bismarck. So they would like come to the Capitol a couple times.
My kids call it my Capitol.
So. Yeah, so isn't that perfect?
Don't tell the governor.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, sorry, Kelly. It was so fascinating to live through their experiences and see it. When I explained to them that I wasn't running, there was that sadness and why am I not and this and that. And then it was, listen, this isn't the end. Like all the stuff that you enjoyed doing, that's public service. Mm-hmm. It's not the end. It's just the next chapter. There's always a way. Volunteering, getting involved. Running for local office. Their mom was a city council member for 8 years. They saw some of that. There are those opportunities. Anybody who was interested in politics, I would strongly encourage someone to get their experience, if possible, outside of the partisan politics. Mm-hmm. Before you've put the labels on as an RD, whatever you are, serve in a nonpartisan, if you can, capacity. Get that experience. Develop the reputation. If you're a Democrat, especially, you're living in an area that might not be super progressive, it might be the only way you can get elected to a partisan office is to demonstrate to your constituents, to your neighbors, that you are trusted, you're effective, you're common sense, and that if and when you ever ran for a partisan office and you put a D next to your name in a more conservative district, voters are going to give you a fair shake. I still believe the split votes on ballots just aren't as common as they used to, but everything is cyclical. Mm-hmm. And I still believe that voters vote for people they know, people they like, people they trust. Mm-hmm. And if you want to be a part of the process, be the person that your neighbors know, that they like, that they trust, and you're going to have a far better chance of success. I'd also tell anybody, especially someone who's facing a more difficult race, define your objectives at the beginning of your campaign. What are you wanting to accomplish? What are your goals? And I'm asking for measurable goals that you can celebrate the morning of the election. Mm-hmm. That way, it doesn't matter where the count is, who won, who lost. You're not basing your success or failure based on the final vote. Was it to engage a certain number of people? Was it to organize a district, to host an event, to get a certain turnout? It's going to vary by district, by community. but establish some of those goals so you can recognize whether or not that campaign was a quote success or a failure. And then win or lose, you still have, hopefully, if you accomplished your goals, you have something to celebrate. And the other one I would tell anybody is when you run for an office, don't plan to run once, plan to run at least twice, win or lose. If you run and win, of course you're going to be everyone's going to expect you to want to run for re-election. And I know life happens. So it's not, you're not signing a blood oath that you're going to do it. But my commitment, what I would ask people, I served as minority leader for a stint and was involved in candidate recruitment, is I want you to commit to running twice. If you run and win re-election, we want that experience. But if you lose, I don't want you to lose that progress. Quentin Burdick ran for office 6 times before he was elected. A famed U.S. senator for North Dakota. And I think he even said that they finally got tired of voting for him, so they just elected him. And persistence can pay off, but that's something that we lose. People run, they get so dejected as soon as they've come in second place, and then you've lost that experience. Any momentum that they've built as a candidate, their ideas, their recognition is lost as soon as they give it up and walk away. And that's unfortunate too.
Looking back at a measure that was passed just a few short years ago, one that's going to term legislators out, does the minority party to Democrats in North Dakota think that may be an opportunity in the future because people are not going to be able to hang on to a seat? Does that open doors potentially for the minor party?
So if I were to put a partisan hat on, I would say that term limits are a great thing. Yeah, and I would say that just strictly as a partisan, where you have a forced, there is a constitutional cleaning of the House every so many years, and you get rid of an incumbency advantage. And I'd say that in any state, red or blue, it doesn't matter. The minority is from a purely partisan perspective, would see term limits as an opportunity for forced turnover and change in administration. From a good governance perspective, I would argue that virtually all of my colleagues, my Democratic colleagues, would agree, is it doesn't help the institution.
Right.
Voters have the choice to send people back. You've got people voted out of office every 2-4 years. I know it sounds selfish to be an elected legislator and to say that I oppose term limits. We are the worst spokespeople on that issue because we have the most vested interest as an elected person to oppose term limits. I see them as taking away a choice for the voters. You lose the opportunity for institutional experience. I encourage people to self-limit. Don't sit in office forever. You're going to get jaded. I said, I've been here 16 years. I'm stepping away. And I'm doing it before I have lost that glimmer. Where I've still am learning things, so there's still room to grow. But I don't think I got my footing in the process. It probably took about 6 to 8 years. And term limits, the way it's been enacted, is it's going to force people out of the job just as they're starting to figure it out, just as they're getting good. And it's going to change how people run for office, how you recruit candidates. If we're wise, we're going to challenge all of our assumptions about how the legislative process should be scheduled to meet a biennial session and know that you're only going to get 4 before you're termed out for life. Best case scenario. That's not helpful. Maybe we need to look at annual sessions. Maybe you need to bring institutional experience back in a nonpartisan think tank and have that be part of the almost a fourth branch of government, or as an advisory role where former legislators, former elected officials can serve as a nonpartisan consultant. But we're going to see it. It's going to take effect in the next couple of years. I ran the numbers. I'm a nerd. My license plate is essentially math magician. I'm the nerd of the chamber in a lot of ways, and I love it. As I mentioned, the 94 and 47. It's 2024. we just had the elections. 37 of the 94 House members are now lame ducks. They can't run again because they're termed out. So they've got 4 years, presumably, where they'll be in office, and then the Constitution says they cannot run for the House ever again. And there are no consequences. So if voters, I mean, technically you can be recalled, but I mean that, if we set that aside, there's almost no accountability. And on the Senate side, it's 14 of the 47. So 37% of the House, 30% of the Senate, 35% of the whole legislature, nearly 50 of the 141 are lame ducks. And as a really bizarre fact, the way it's written is we have a district here in Mandan. We're here at the Capitol today. So in Mandan, good friend, colleague, former Senator Doug Larson, he unfortunately passed away last October. He had a replacement appointed, and Senator Justin Gerhardt was appointed to fill the vacancy. He was just elected to his first full 4-year term. He has not served a session. He can't run for re-election because if he were to run for another term in 4 years, that would put him over 8 years. And that's the way our term limits are written, is that it's a limit of 8 years for the House or the Senate. And then because of the staggering of terms, also here in Bismarck, District 35, you've got one of the longest, the Dean of the House, Representative Bob Martinson. He's been in the legislature since the 70s. Took 4 years off for a period in the 90s to serve under the Schaefer administration, but he's been an institution. He doesn't come up for his re-election for 2 years. So Justin Gerhardt, brand new, will be termed out before Bob Martinson, who's been here since the 70s. So when you see how and that's part of the implementation, and it's obscure, but term limits, I don't think solve any of the problems that voters are frustrated with, but I understand why they vote for them. It's easy to understand. The problem is those bums at the Capitol. It's always the other guy, but even then, throw them out and it solves all the problems. Unfortunately, it won't. You're still going to have challenges, and now you're going to have new challenges. And then hopefully, some people will recognize that maybe we can do this differently so that you can still have turnover, but still give voters a chance to send experience back to the Capitol without having to rely on bureaucracy and workarounds and other things like that.
All right. Well, and we'll see if it does benefit the minority party.
In a couple more cycles. And I'm proud. This is where I am the worst partisan there is, because if it does benefit the minority party, but it's not good for the institution, I'm saddened. It's going to break my heart. And not because I want the Democratic Party or the minority party to win. If it doesn't help, or if it doesn't contribute to a healthy democratic republic, to that institution, I think it's counterproductive. It's a mirage. It's not beneficial. It's a flash in the pan. And I could be wrong. That's one of the things about this, where it's the laboratory of democracy is states and political subs, and we'll see what happens. Hopefully we get a taste of what it's going to look like, make some adjustments, and like anything, we can come back if we need to make any repairs, make any fixes, and hopefully we're able to communicate it effectively. Voters are able to engage so that it doesn't seem like it's one side pushing another.
All right. Well, once again, thank you so much for taking time to visit about this a very important topic in North Dakota. And so, good luck in your next career.
The afterlife. And it's funny, as I have no plans for office, but I will say, I remember in 2009, I'm a freshman, I'm 23, I show up, and former Representative Rick Berg had just announced that he wasn't going to run for re-election, a Republican legislator from Fargo. He'd been in since the 90s. Former majority leader, former speaker, a bit controversial in the chamber, just because of fights and everything, personalities and leadership challenges. But he was passionate and a good legislator, and he was out. And I just remember going up to him and saying, "I can't believe you're leaving politics. You're so young." And somebody said, "Yeah, we'll see if he leaves." wasn't long after he announced he was running for Congress. So
right.
I'm not doing that. It's not something I have any intention of doing, but public service comes in all forms. And just because I'm turning in my key fob and adding the word former to my title, it's exciting to stay part of the process, to stay engaged, to hopefully be a mentor, a role model, or find other ways that I can contribute to the process.
All right.
Thank you so much, Brian. Really appreciate it.
And thanks again for listening to 701 Civics as we dive in and learn about the civics processes and people and positions in North Dakota. Please be sure also to stop and rate us on the podcast format that you're listening to so we can continue to increase our audience and be better citizens of our state and of our nation.